Ryan Nobles, good morning. Good morning, Ryan. Good morning. Do you get
Hi,
autographs?
Bill, good morning.
Do you get autographs, Ryan?
I do not. I am not an autograph seeker. That's not my style.
Do people ask for yours, though?
Either.
I'd imagine you get a lot of requests for autographs.
Generally, when I am asked for an autograph, it's someone making fun of me.
I got to tell you something.
Can I have your autograph?
I get the same thing, and I'm like, okay, you're making a fool out of me, but I'd gladly devalue that piece of paper. Just give it to me. Well, let me sign it and ruin the value.
Bill usually says it's not a check, is it?
Thanks for that, Jeff. Thank you. Good morning, Ryan Nobles from CNN. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. How are you? You enjoying President's Week?
Well, happy Trump Week, I believe is what it's now known as. And yes, we are. I do have to say, this time, Ryan, are you feeling Republicans are open to something that I never thought they'd be open to, and that is more gun regulation? What are your thoughts?
I do think there is somewhat of a cracking of the ice on this particular issue. I don't know how far that goes. I mean, I think, the president drives the bus on this. I've always said when I've talked with you guys that Donald Trump is not an ideologue, so he's not somebody that has entrenched positions on any particular issues.
Yeah.
If you go back and read his past statements on gun control, he's been open to things like expanded background checks in court. Of course, that was before he took $30 million from the NRA for his presidential campaign. But I think the underreported story at this point, and I think you're going to hear more about it today, is that this might not be a Republican problem. This might be a Democratic problem. And what I mean by that is you've got about 10 Democrats in ruby red states that are up for re-election that probably don't want to take a tough vote as it relates to guns.
Yeah.
And you may see the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, your senator, run a little defense for these guys and say, we don't need to rush on an issue like this. We need to spend more time talking about it.
Well,
So
you take a look at an Anthony Brindisi. He is pro Second Amendment, and this would be a real mistake. And also, some of these guys don't know the difference between an automatic weapon and a semi-automatic weapon, an assault rifle. We're throwing these terms around left and right. They're getting them wrong, and that doesn't help the argument.
And that's the problem right there, Bill. You hit the nail on the head, is that every single time we start this conversation, it automatically gets pushed to the extremes with the pro-gun group saying that all the anti-gun groups want to do is take away all of your weapons. They want to come into your house and take those weapons away. And the anti-gun group saying you just want unlimited access to any type of firearm at any time. And, of course, the average American is somewhere in the middle there, but we can't even get to that point because everybody just retreats to their entrenched positions, and yet these school shootings continue to happen and no substantive change is made of any kind.
You have to consider there's so much to this, and in politics – we never get into the true depth of a topic, right? We say things like we love the hyperbole, we love to talk about things in general, but when you get down to it, we're going to make sure that people who are mentally unfit do not receive they can't get a hold of weapons. We're going to do that. Well, are you really? And the minute we start taking guns away from people that we believe or the government believes is unfit mentally, now there's a debate over, is this person really unfit? Is this personal? Is it political? This is far more deep and far more controversial and difficult than it's being presented as. Do you agree with that?
There's so much nuance to this argument. The idea that you can solve it with one piece of legislation by changing one set of policies is really a fantasy. I think that we need to have a conversation about guns. That's absolutely true. We also need to have a conversation about mental health laws. We need to have a conversation about school security. There's about 10 different aspects of this problem that we continue to ignore because we get caught up in the politics of it. And what's unfortunate about that is that young people's lives are at risk as a result of it. And when we can kind of get out from beneath ourselves and say, hey, there's about 10 things that we all agree upon. Let's get those enacted as soon as possible so we can protect our kids. And people seem to lose sight of that, I think.
Yeah. What do you think on the president here? The president basically saying when it comes to the bump stocks and some of these other things, looking for more gun regulation, maybe even something that's more federally instituted. There's already an assault rifle ban. That's when they keep talking about these automatic weapons. They're not illegal. People are talking about automatic weapons. These are Congress people. They're already banned. And the assault ban didn't really accomplish anything. Because prohibition doesn't seem to work. I think we're missing the point on we keep cutting funding when it comes to mental health. That has been cut over decades to the point now where we have these people that are just out on their own, and we have no means to be able to help them or to prevent them from doing stuff like this.
And then, you know, what you're talking about, Bill, what you're getting back to is a conversation about healthcare, right?
Right.
And this is how all these things are intertwined. And, you know, we continue to fight in Washington about health care. And the fact of the matter is that when, you know, we are in this kind of holding pattern with the next stage of the Affordable Care Act, does it get repealed? Does something replace it? You know, instead we have the worst of both worlds. And the funding for mental health and mental health programs falls right in the middle of that. Because in many respects, the people that are in most need of mental health treatment are the people who come from impoverished backgrounds that need the government's support. So when you're talking about this kind of social safety net that most Americans agree we need, the people that fall through the cracks are not the people that come from wealthy backgrounds who have a support system. I mean, take a look at the shooter in this case. This was someone whose parents both died at a very young age.
Yeah.
He ended up floating between house to house. This is someone that needed the help of the government. And if you're not fully funding these programs, that allows these type of people to fall through the cracks, and that's where the difficult thing comes. And we just don't seem willing to have those tough conversations, and I think that's probably what these lawmakers need to grapple with.
Do you? I want to switch gears to the Russia investigation. Are you hearing that Flynn is considering pulling back from his guilty plea?
That is one of the things that we are trying to figure out. So it's not just Flynn, but, you know, the other one is Rick Gates, who is Paul Manafort's former chief of staff. And Rick Gates, we had thought over the past couple of days, was on the verge of cutting a deal to plead guilty and then testify against Paul Manafort. And for some reason, that deal has not gone through. So now you have to wonder if that extends to Michael Flynn, because we don't know exactly what role Michael Flynn plays in that. So we don't know that definitively. There are certainly rumors floating right now. But before you even get to Flynn, you got to talk about Gates. So does that happen first? You know, Gates changed his counsel. It looked like he was in a position to cut a deal. Now all of a sudden there seems to be a holdup there. I know we have people at the federal courthouse around the clock waiting for something to happen, because that's the one thing about Robert Mueller is there are no leaks from that special counsel office. So you don't know anything that happens until they actually file their formal plea agreements.
It is interesting how, depending on who you talk to or who you hear talking, or in your case, probably talking to these people, the indictments that came on Friday, the president out saying, well, this is proof, this is more proof, there's no collusion. And even Claudia Tenney, our congresswoman, was on your network over the weekend talking, in my opinion, in circles about the fact that basically in the indictments it said that there was no collusion, that the Russians did try to interfere, but there was no collusion. Did that indictment say anything about that?
No.
Where is this coming from, Claudia Tenney? I gotta wonder. Other than reading the president's tweets, where is it coming from?
Well, they're basing this on a statement made by Rod Rosenstein, who's the Deputy Attorney General. He's the one overseeing the Russia investigation. He's in charge of the special counsel. And in essentially the press release, the statement that he put out, he said that in this specific indictment, there are no Americans who have been directly accused of anything having to do with these particular indictments. But he goes on to say in that statement that there are still the investigation is ongoing. We have not uncovered everything. As we've said many times with the Robert Mueller investigation, it's not over until Robert Mueller says it's over. And the idea that anyone else is absolved of any kind of wrongdoing because of this indictment is just fantasy.
Yeah.
And I think the president and the president's closest aides tried to make him feel like this protected him more than it actually did.
Yeah.
And we have reporting that he felt very good about it initially. And then over the weekend, he saw the coverage and then started to say, why are people still not saying that I've been cleared? He's not been cleared. Nobody's been cleared. That's not what these indictments say.
Right.
It just says that in this particular instance, no American is directly accused of the crimes that these 13 individuals that were indicted, these Russian individuals were accused of. So, long way to go here.
Ryan, I saw a report Monday or Tuesday. It may have been on CNN. I was wondering if you had any info on this. It was talking about, because I think this actually ties into both issues that we discussed this morning. It was talking about Russian Twitter accounts that the government, I don't know if it was the FBI or the NSA or who it was, noticed an uptick in Russian Twitter accounts that were for folks that were here in the U.S., but they may have been Russian-born or Russian citizens, using hashtags like ban guns or no guns, or using hashtags involving the NRA, almost as a way to seem to influence people to come out and say, okay, ban guns or the NRA is awful.
I see it as pouring gasoline on a fire.
Right, and it's almost like they're influencing this discussion now.
Right.
They absolutely are. So what, more than anything, and I think, if the president would kind of be a little bit more on the idea that Russia's trying to mess with us, we'd be able to have a more honest conversation about this, but he is so hung up on the legitimacy of his election victory. More than anything, what Russia's trying to do is they're not necessarily in favor of one side or another in the United States. What they're in favor of is sowing discord. Right. They want the fight. They want, it's not just, you mentioned they will jump in, they'll find their Twitter bots that will jump into the gun debate. They're also really into baiting race conversations and fights over racial issues. There's this long line of examples of every time there's a hot button issue, particularly culture war issues in the United States, of this uptick in these Russian bots basically playing both sides of the argument with the goal of just making Americans mad at each other, particularly through social media. And that's the big problem, because they're dividing us by taking both sides.
Well, even I don't know. I'm not the only person that saw that Facebook meme that went out with Jesus sitting on one side and Hillary on the other, or whatever it was. But basically, a vote with Jesus, vote Trump. If you remember that came out, that was a perfect example of how they're trying to divide both sides. Those really kind of connecting with those people who are really true to their religion, and just creating this adversity, this craziness, this controversy and turmoil in not just in the election, but in our daily communication and how we communicate with each other.
Right. No, and this is where I think, I hope that the average American can take a step back and say, a lot of this is on me as a consumer, as someone that consumes media. When you look at your Facebook feed and you see a story that, resonates with you in some respect, and before you just fire off and share it or like it or comment on it, you take a step and say, what is the source of this particular piece of information? Should I take a beat here before I just fire it off and then spread what ultimately is a lie, and before it gets into the ether? And, we all have Facebook friends who do this. I mean, my father still forwards me wacky emails that he gets from, different conspiracy groups. That's what's kind of poisoning the water right now. And, my sense is that I actually think this might be a tipping point for us as a society, where we kind of recognize the fact that people are trying to mess with us, and that makes us smarter consumers, and we get a little bit more honest about what we're sharing. I just hope that most people are paying attention to it, because the problem that we have with the internet is you can find something, if you've already got an established opinion on something, you can find something that backs up that opinion. And if you're willing to just only look for that, well, you could end up heading down a road that isn't necessarily all that accurate.
Ryan Nobles, CNN. It's always a joy, Ryan, to there's just so much out there. We appreciate it. We'll talk again next week, man.
I don't know if you guys reported this yet, but Reverend Billy Graham has passed away.
We did, really
all right.
big news. So, all right, thanks, Ryan. We appreciate
all right,
it.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Ryan Nobles,
Bye, Ryan.
CNN.